Okay, hello and welcome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Lupin, and I am so excited to be your host this evening for Live by the Word, Titilope Sonuga on the business of poetry. Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. First off, a couple of Zoom reminders. You probably got a message as you came into this Zoom meeting that this is being recorded. You are welcome to keep your camera on if you would like to. We do ask that you stay muted so that we don't have any accidental pop-ups during the conversation. We have a really exciting, wonderful speaker tonight, Titilope Sonuga, who is quickly becoming one of my favorite poets and is also the newest Poet Laureate of the city of Edmonton. So before we begin, I would like to do the land acknowledgement. I will fully admit I am speaking to you tonight from Calgary, Alberta, which is Treaty 7 Mohkinstsis. So this is not a land acknowledgement that I am quite as familiar with, and I apologize in advance if my pronunciation is not quite what it should be. The Edmonton Arts Council acknowledges the traditional land on which Edmonton, Amiskawatskaskaikan sits, the territory of the Treaty 6 First Nations, and the homelands of the Métis people. We would like to recognize and thank the diverse Indigenous people whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Nahiawak, Cree, Dene Suline, Nakota Sioux, Saulteaux, Niitsitapi, Blackfoot, as well as the Métis and the Inuk Inuit peoples. It is a welcoming place for all peoples who come from around the world to share Edmonton as a home. Together, we call upon all of our collective honored traditions and spirits to work in building a great city for today and future generations. A couple of exciting announcements as well. The Edmonton Arts Council is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year with a contest that is open with prizes like season tickets to local events, unique art pieces, and gift certificates. If you would like to see the full guidelines, you can visit edmontonarts.ca. Free workshops and info sessions like tonight's will continue through the fall. On September 21st, there will be an information session on the new Smart Simple grant portal and the individuals and collectives grants. And the deadline is coming up for that on October 1st. On September 28th, we'll be talking with both visual artists about packaging and preparing their work in a retail context. About this session in particular, following this evening, David will be sending out a short survey to registrants seeking feedback on this particular session and any ideas for future workshops. Any feedback that you can offer is much, much appreciated. So it's my absolute pleasure now to introduce our guest of honor. Titilope Sonuga is a writer, poet, playwright, and performer whose work grasps for moments of tenderness and persistent joy at the intersection of Blackness and womanhood. She's the author of 3 award-winning collections of poetry, Down to Earth, Abscess, and most recently, This Is How We Disappear, and has composed and released 2 spoken word albums, Mother Tongue and Swim. Titilope has written 3 plays, The Six, an intergenerational exploration of womanhood, Naked, a one-woman play, and Aid of the Country, a musical. She has scripted global advertising campaigns for brands including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Google, Intel Corporation, Guarantee Trust Bank, and the MacArthur Foundation. She was an actor on the hit television series Giddy Up, which aired across Africa. Her writing has been translated into Italian, German, and Slovak. She is the 9th Poet Laureate of the city of Edmonton. Welcome.
Thank you. That bio always feels very extended when it's actually being read back. It is an honor to be here and really a privilege to be able to share some of the stuff that I have learned over the years, some of the mistakes that I've made, some of the things that I wish somebody had told me about the business of being a poet. Some background, my name is Titilope Sonuga, and I'm a poet, I'm a writer and performer. And about 12 years ago, I began my journey as an artist. I was still working full-time as a civil engineer then. And so I've been working full-time just as an artist for about 8 years. And before that, my career in engineering was going quite well. So transitioning from that, this this act of essentially blowing up my life to be an artist full time, I didn't have the tools. I was going from this automated career where every 2 weeks there was a paycheck that was deposited in my account, my taxes were paid for me, and I just went about my life. And so I struggled in the beginning and made a lot of mistakes. And I feel like that's what makes me able to share this with you today. I want to preface this by saying I'm sharing my experience. I'm not a financial expert by any measure, and I don't know the unique features of your life or the work that you do, but I will try to be as candid and as open as possible. I realize in the arts in particular, there's a lot of shrouding around the idea of how you make money. If you make money, what do you do? How do you do that? And what has served me in my work is having a village of people that I can speak to honestly and say, this is what I'm thinking, what do you think? And that to me has been invaluable. So I'm hoping that I can offer something similar here today. What I had to quickly do is realize that in order to live out a full career as a poet or as an artist or a storyteller, I needed to think about poetry as an expansive thing. I couldn't relegate it to being just, I'm going up to a microphone, I'm speaking at the microphone, I'm being paid an honorarium, and then I leave the stage. I quickly realized that wasn't going to sustain me. I was watching my savings deplete. And I needed to think about the ways in which I could build up a career that would be sustainable for me. And I wanted to get out of the cycle of applying for grants to fund a project and then not much else at the end of it, going to a show, wanting to do the show, but only having a small honorarium. How could I create a career that was sustainable, in which I wasn't always sort of checking to see where I was at, which I think also affects your creative output if you're always thinking about feeding yourself, really. And so speaking of doing expansive work, I started to think about all the ways that poetry could exist in the world. I started to think about how to create a roadmap for myself. So that's writing poetry collections, that's doing spoken word albums, that's writing stage productions, that's ad campaigns for brands, plays, which is like a new place that I'm entering into, writing for television, influencing on social media because I had started to grow a following, and just always thinking about like, where's the magic? Where in all of this can poetry exist in a way that is non-traditional, but is still poetry nonetheless? How do I be sort of less precious about my definitions around what it means to be a working poet? It has been very, very helpful for me to categorize the work that I do. And I'll share those categories with you now. And I should mention that while I'm speaking, if you have any questions that pop up for you, there's a chat window, you can type them in, and then at the end of this, I'll be able to answer them. So in order to do the work I was trying to do, I had to create some categories in my mind. And I will share them with you now. Oh, wrong page. Just a second. You would think after over 18 months of doing Zoom work, I'd be way more proficient. Okay, which of my screens are you seeing, Amy?
I'm currently seeing a Word document.
Okay, wrong screen. Man, this is something. If it won't allow me to share it, I will abandon sharing altogether and just speak to you. We'll try again. Nope. Okay. So these are the categories. So maybe instead of looking at the presentation, you can take some notes. That might be easier. So category 1 for me was the work that was heart work. And by that, I mean work that speaks to my heart, work that I really, really particularly cared about. Oh, I have a solution to that problem. Can you see it now?
I saw it before. Right now it's a blank screen. It's just white, but it did say the category as artwork before.
Hmm.
The Zoom gods aren't cooperating today.
What about now?
This one says a brief history.
Okay, so category 1 was heart work, right? So work that is near and dear to my heart. Category 2 is community work. Category 3 is royalties. And the last category was big ticket, right? So I'm gonna break these down into individual sections so that you can understand what I mean. So when I talk about heart work, I'm talking about your why. These are the things that matter most to you. And if the conversation we're having right now is with a person who decides, I just want to make art, I'm not particularly interested in earning money from that art, it's something I do on the side, it's a hobby, then that's a different kind of why. But my why at the beginning of this was, yes, I love my work. Yes, I feel like it is a gift and a privilege to be able to share this work, but I also want to do this full time. And I also want to have a family and a home. And I also want to eat good food and travel and do all the things. So the question for me was, how do I allow these two whys to align? How do I allow myself to do the thing I love and also be able to, for that thing to yield fruit for me and my family? And thing 2 within that category is the ability to invest in yourself. That means it's one thing to have a gift or a calling or be good at something, but just like any skill or work that you do, you want to get better at it. So this is a place of workshops. This is a place of mentorship even. This is the place of looking for ways in which you can improve upon the thing that you do well, such that it can become a valuable service or a valuable offering to somebody that might want to pay for it beyond it being entertainment. This also is a place where grants work very well. So there's tons of grants that you can apply for that allow you to research, to develop, to explore, and create. For me, this is the time to allow that investment to let you do the exploration within your work, to let you do a collaboration that you've never done before that would have cost you a killing, but now you can articulate that within the framework of a grant and be able to do that work and do that work well. A lot of this hard work, I will say, isn't necessarily income generating, but sometimes it is, and that's a sweet spot, right? But it is the work that to me is necessary to do to get to the place where you can start to demand or ask for a certain level of pay. The next category is community. So nobody is an island and nobody can do this work by themselves. So there must exist a community within which you do your work. For me, this community was about building an ecosystem so that I could thrive within that ecosystem. And it isn't work that is necessarily monetary, but it is in service of your craft and the craft of all the other people around me. So for me, that was, for example, building the Breath and Poetry Collective here in Edmonton, which is just an open mic for poets to come and share their work, but also became a springboard for other poets to do so many different things in their careers. Having that network that I could network across with, joining hands with F.A. Paul in Nigeria to start the Lagos International Poetry Festival and to work with him on that was also a way of building ecosystems, building a system around yourself that supports you. This community work also invites collaborations. It also invites trading skills and knowledge, networking across. So it allows you to, over time, build a portfolio for yourself that may have cost an arm and a leg in another circumstance, but because you're now networking across with people, with like-minded people within this community, you can actually build a very, very solid and polished portfolio of your work just by trading your skills. Maybe you have a friend who's a photographer, who's a videographer, who's you know, a filmmaker, anything that feeds sort of a vision or a goal that you have for yourself. Maybe they're trying to build up their own portfolio as well. And by recording your work, they can add that to their portfolio while you have a clean and clear audio or video that you can use to submit for grants or use to post online to build your following, all that kind of stuff. So I place a lot of value in the community around myself and the people that I know and trust. Royalties. This is the work that I call like the little drops of water. It's the work that is small paying gigs, community organizations that just have a small honorarium. It's the networks that you build that are just going to bring in very small drops, but very small drops that are consistent over time. This is also the work that you can do on your own, building up like a small sampling of your own merchandise. So that's chapbooks or CDs, or I've seen people do postcards or buttons where they would go and perform at a show and sell these things hand to hand. There's also licensing, royalties, and features, which I'll speak a little bit further on when I get to the big tickets. This means that sometimes organizations may not have a lot upfront to pay you, but is it possible to say, you can't pay me what my quote unquote fee is off the top, but can you pay me a little bit over time for an extended period of time? Is that possible? That also allows these royalties to sort of be generating behind the scenes. And I think that's still an important part of building up revenue. You allow companies or brands to sort of rent your work for a short period of time. And then there's the big tickets, right? So these are big brands, big gigs who might upfront promise you exposure, but I want to let you know that exposure does not pay bills. For me, when you're working with a brand like this, charge them your fee, charge them what you're worth, double it, add tax. And in order to know what you should be charging, which I know is a question that comes up often, research. Like the internet is free and open. And sometimes it's just about Googling, like how much do certain people charge for this sort of thing and trying to calibrate it for your industry. Say the scary number. You know, the worst thing that can possibly happen is that they say no. Say the big number and see what happens. And also, if you've built this network or community around yourself, you can ask other people. I know that there's a lot of shame or shyness around asking others, you know, how much did you charge for this gig, or how much is fair to charge? But being able to do that with a network of people that I trust has saved me a world of loss and embarrassment. Of course, I've made mistakes along the way and undercharged and not charged and done work for free. But in building up this community, I've been able to ask questions and then being able to adjust for the next time around. And then this idea of license agreements or royalty payments. So if you're working for a particularly big brand who says, we want to use, and I'm speaking now for poets in particular, because this is the industry that I'm in, spoken word poets, and we want you to perform a piece for us, write or commission a poem that you write. I think it's very important to ask some questions about what that looks like. So you go in, you write a poem, you record a video, and then this poem gets used where and for what? It's become increasingly important for me in my work after a series of errors to ask the question, after this recording is done for this particular thing, this campaign, this performance, where is this video going and for how long? Because that is a service that you have offered. And so it is important to ask where that service is going to be continuing to be used, essentially for free. So if a brand or an organization intends to use your work consistently over time, then you are now entering into the realm of license agreements and royalty payments. And what does that look like? Otherwise, it is best, I think, to sort of limit the amount of time that work is being used for and be paid a one-time fee. But ask the question, always ask the question. And there should be agreements. You should be writing something down and signing it, and never, in my opinion, a lot of contracts will say things like in perpetuity. So you sign a contract, you create a piece of work that a brand can use over and over and over and over again in so many different ways. And that is not what you want. I personally I never sign anything away for good. I always say if I sign it off for good, then my children's children need to be eating off of this thing. So I would suggest having somebody who knows legal looking at these agreements before you sign them. And it pays, no matter how small the thing is, no matter how inconsequential it seems at the beginning, get it on the page. Just get something written down, a one-pager with something that you can get someone who knows what they're doing to look at is always going to save you a lot of headache in the future. I've had lots of situations in which we had to go back to what was on the page and say, this is what we wrote down and this is what we signed off on. This is a way in which you allow your work to stretch over time and to serve you over time. One of the things that is an undercurrent in being able to say, this is what I charge, is building social capital. And I don't mean just on social media necessarily. There is the social capital that you build online, growing an audience, and the ways to do that. They're experts at this, but one of the things that I have learned is that you could follow the algorithm and think about, this is the optimal time to post, this is how many times to post things, and maybe that will grow you an audience. But what I found to be the most effective way to grow an audience is by being authentic and being consistent. Tell the truth of yourself and do it consistently. Your village will come, your tribe will come, and it takes time to grow an online audience, right? Sometimes you'll have a viral moment in which something will happen and an audience will appear for you, but it takes time. Just doing the thing that you do, doing it well. This is the place for maybe those videos or pictures or whatever it is that you created with that network, that community that you've built. This is stuff you can post online along with little snippets of your work. These are ways to get people to know that you are there and to look further into your work. Then there's the social capital that you build in community. For that, I think it is even more important than your online presence. Building social capital in community for me means showing up, build a good name for yourself, be on time, be professional, and deliver. So if you've been asked to come and perform someplace or to write a commission for something, do it and do it well. Deliver the thing that you said you were going to deliver and deliver it on time, such that people start to trust you and trust the work that you will deliver on. There's this idea of artists being sort of flighty and waiting for inspiration to happen to them. And that's great within the context of a career you're trying to build where you're not intending to earn a living. But if you want to build a career out of this, you have to start to treat this work like you're going to an office every day. In the same way that a report is due, a poem is due, a book draft is due, do it and do it well. Sometimes go out of your way to even sweeten that experience. So in the beginning, if I was invited to a show, I would sometimes take a friend who was, on guitar or on drums, who wanted a gig for that day, and we would split whatever meager payment we were getting, just so that that performance had a little something extra. And a lot of times that yielded something more for either one of us or both of us together. This is how you carry your people along as well. Sometimes it pays if it isn't going too much out of your way. Sometimes it pays to do a little bit extra. Even in building your own portfolio, it looks good to have work that is dynamic. Things like finding out what the event is like, this place that you're going, and dressing the part. If it's a black tie, show up in black tie. It really is about taking yourself seriously, um, and treating the work like it is precious to you. And so this is the only place in which I'll say, even though I said exposure doesn't pay bills, exposure also matters in a way. So if you go for a gig and they have big money, and I'm just throwing out a giant number here, and they want to pay you $50,000 to appear on their stage, right? If you show up unprepared and unsure about why you're there, even, there's a way that that is harmful to your future work that makes whatever you were paid not even worth it. Better to show up for a show in which you're not being paid much and do it well and do it excellently in growing the social capital where people start to trust you. You want to use that time on stage as an ad campaign for yourself, for whoever is watching in the audience and who might need you for some future thing. Some of my biggest gigs have come from the most unexpected and unassuming places. I'll stop sharing here for a quick second. To say that there's a level of planning that you can do around what you want your career to be, but ultimately the work makes its own way. So you have to create the work and allow it to make its own way through the world. And I feel like that hasn't failed me over time. I've tried to find my tribe and my audience just by doing consistent work and knowing what that work was worth to me. So I'll go over some things again, just to be clear. Defining your why. That's like the first thing you want to do. Why are you doing this work? Why does it matter to you? Who does it matter to? And who can it be of service to? Taking yourself seriously, being professional, and think of your work in terms of a service that can be provided. So categorize it. Hard work, that's work you're doing just to grow the skill, work you're doing just to get better, just to get your feet wet, just to grow this thing that you love. And sometimes hard work is even work that you've decided you're not going to commodify. Like it's work you're not going to sell. It's work that you're just creating for yourself. A lot of my own hard work is work that it just never gets shared anywhere. It's work that I put in a book, or it's work that I release for free. That makes me feel still connected to the work that I do. Then community. No, none of us win this race alone. There's no doing it by yourself and for yourself and getting to the end of anything. Build a community around you. That community doesn't have to be 100 people. It could be 3 or 4 people who are in similar field as you, or very diverse fields in which your work can feed each other. It's creating portfolios together. It's sharing your skills, networking across, not necessarily above or upward. It's about saying this person has a skill that they can offer me and I have something I can offer them, and we're going to do it together. This is a great way to build your portfolio in the beginning when there's no money. Royalties and big tickets. Yes, you can accept work that doesn't pay a lot in the beginning. Have a few of those and they will make for consistent earnings over time. And sometimes in doing those pieces of work that are giving you the consistent earnings, it puts you in a place to be able to do the big ticket work where you can ask for all of the money and be unafraid to ask for the scary number that's in your mind. The worst that can happen is that you land maybe at half of that, and that's still a good day, in my opinion. And I think one of the things that has been most important in this work that I do is the ability to say no. Time is currency, right? So if there's a piece of work that you're being asked to do that isn't offering value financially, isn't feeding your heart or your soul, it's just work, right? It's just work. It pays to say no, because I feel like time spent investing in your own work is better than time spent running around doing work that adds no value to you. So say no. Your time is your currency. So there's time for kind of buckling down and doing your work and growing your own portfolio for yourself that you can then apply toward the little earnings, the royalties, or maybe something big. Don't waste your time on work that doesn't feed your spirit. Ultimately, even if you are being paid an enormous amount of money, you need to be able to tie that back to your why something matters to you, why something feels good to you, rather than just doing it for the sake of it. There has to be some connection to why you do this work. Otherwise, say no and trust that there will be other work that will come that you can then say yes to because you freed up your time. Don't hide your light. I think there is this fear or embarrassment around shameless self-promotion. Nobody knows your work exists if they don't know your work exists, right? So post the work, share the work, make the video, no matter how shabby it is in the beginning. If nobody knows the work exists, then there's nothing to know. Build that name, grow your audience, and share it widely. In the arts, especially in poetry, there's this there's a seriousness around the thing that we do that makes it seem like you can't necessarily promote work. Like you sort of just wait for the work to be known by virtue of its goodness or by virtue of your skill, which is great. I'm sure we're all skilled. But the beauty of the social media age that we live in, this online space that's free for all of us, is that it is a marketplace. So market yourself and do it shamelessly, and do it, be your own publicist, I guess I would say. Like, share your own work confidently in such a way that you never know really where that work goes. For me, some of the biggest gigs that I've done, the highest paying gigs that I've done, have come from some obscure video or podcast or poem that somebody heard somewhere on the internet or heard somewhere on the radio or whatever it was, and that led back to work that was really meaningful. So don't hide your light, share the work, let the world know that you exist. I've run very quickly through a lot of things because I wanted to leave room for us at the end here to be able to chat through, ask questions. I'm going to try to be as transparent and unafraid to answer your questions as possible. If there's something that you've wanted to know, I'm willing to tell you in the way that I wish that I had been told.
If anyone has questions they would like to ask, feel free to drop them in the chat, which, if you don't know, is just on that bottom panel on your Zoom screen. I will read out questions. So if you do have any questions that you would like to ask, take a couple minutes now and type them in, and hopefully we'll have time to get to all of them. Perhaps while folks are thinking about their questions, I will start us off with one. Something that I'm quite curious about, and you touched on this a little bit, but how did you grow your audience when you first started working as an artist, and how did you leverage that into ultimately being paid work?
Okay. So in the beginning, there was Facebook. And that's where I think everyone started in their social media life. And in that time, all I had was my friends and family, and I would share my poems on my, there's a notes feature on Facebook, and share those poems, and people would like and comment. And then there was Instagram, which is a more visual medium. And so that presented a challenge as well, because what I do is poetry. But I think what I had to do was find a merger between the work that I do and the person that I am. I realized that the reason why we're on social media is to connect with other human beings. We want to know that we are not alone, that somebody else shares a particular feeling or a thought. And so how could I, within the context of my life, share myself with people, which opens a door, but also share my work with people, which opens another door. So it was just a lot of experimenting with finding creative ways to showcase the work, either visually in the text or in a video, or other work I'd done offline that I'd bring into the online space. I was lucky or blessed because I also, and this ties into the thing I said about thinking about your work as expansive. So in the beginning, when I was just working as a poet full-time, I was also open to any iteration of storytelling that came my way. So I had an opportunity to act on a television show at the time. And though I'd never acted before, I saw it as a way to learn another skill within this storytelling medium. So rather than saying, no, I'm a poet, I only write for the page, I'm working on my giant manuscript, I said yes and thought, I'll just try this thing. In doing that television series that aired across the continent, I brought into my life an audience that didn't necessarily know my poetry or know me, but they knew the show and they wanted to know more about what I was up to. So they came and followed me along this journey. I say this to say that it actually pays to try to diversify the work that you do. And this also comes from building community. So if you're working with a musician, for example, and you're going to a gig that a musician is doing, that's a completely different audience from your core literary writing audience, right? So expand the places that you go and expand the things that you do, and that allows you to bring in different eyes into the work that you do and grow an audience slowly. It also means that when you go for an event, and I'm speaking to poets here who go and typically we go up to a microphone, we perform, and we leave the stage, say your name so people can hear your name. Tell them where they can find you. I remember in the beginning, I had a little business card that I used to give people because I thought I was very, very official. And so I would perform, and when I was done, people would ask me, and I would have a card that said, this is my name, this is my website, this is my Instagram, this is all of the things. And it's like little drops of water. It happens slowly over time. People find you and they will follow you. So yeah, try to expand your networks and introduce yourself to people.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. We are getting lots of questions from the audience, which is excellent. So our first question is from Jaden. Jaden says, when it comes to not hiding my light, how much can I really share on social media where people tend to copy things? How do I still own my work yet share?
That's a big thing, especially with poets and copywriting and all that kind of stuff, because Instagram and all these platforms will tell you that once you post it on there, it belongs to them. So with things for the page in particular, short, bite-sized tasters of your work is better than the entire poem, particularly because sometimes if you want to submit this poem for publication elsewhere, that counts as it being published. So things that are near and dear to you, hold them tight, but find within that work little snippets, one-liner, a two-liner, something that you can share online that doesn't necessarily give away the entirety of the thing. I think also we have to go back to other ways of showcasing your work beyond the page necessarily, such that it's like that copy and pasting isn't as easy to do. So what other mediums can your work be showcased in? Can you create a video perhaps? Can you create audio work that you can then share online? I guess I would say hold the things that are most precious to you closely for where you would like them to end up, be that a manuscript or a book or a chapbook, whatever it is, but find within that other things that you can use as a way to tease back to other places where people can find you and actually buy your work. So if it's a book that you have, then maybe it's a short poem from that book that leads back to a link or something that people can go and buy the entire thing. But yeah, I would be extremely careful about posting the entirety of your work online.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize as I'm reading through the chat questions if I mispronounce anybody's name. This next question comes from Jimoke. In building a community, what are the best ways to build collaborative projects?
I think, okay, so you kind of look around you, right? So in your portfolio, in your work, you have certain goals that you have for that period, right? So if your next goal as a writer, I'm assuming, is that you want to create more audio work, or you need new headshots to apply for a thing, or you want to create a short video of a poem that you've written, find within your networks other people who are in that same growing and building phase of their work, who are maybe looking for a subject for work that they want to create. So collaborating with another filmmaker who perhaps isn't a big ticket filmmaker, but somebody who's trying and doing this work, it makes for a better collaboration when it's clear that you're both sort of figuring it out. So what you are offering is your voice, your image, your performance for them to build a portfolio that they can share on their platforms. And what you're getting in return is pretty decent video work, for example. So it's a matter of deciding what your goals are for that period. What do you want to create? And then finding people in your area, and it's not hard to do if you're online these days, is finding people who are doing work that you admire, but like they're grasping for something and reaching out and saying, hey, this is what I can offer, would you be willing to do this thing, either as a skill exchange, or having a conversation around what they desire and how you can add value for them as well. And then just trying it out and understanding that it's not going to be perfect in the beginning. It's not going to be yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect at first. You're sort of in a period of figuring it out together, and being able to say, this is what I desire for it to look or feel like, and then being able to experiment that way. By the end of that project, they've learned something, and so have you, and now you both walk away with something tangible that you can use for the work that you want to do.
Amazing. Okay, our next question is from Ayamide, who asks, what is your perspective on MFAs and other higher education for poets? Does it matter, and does it actually make you better?
I feel like this person is trying to put me in trouble. I'm just kidding. I think MFAs are wonderful. If in your definition of your whys, there's an MFA, go for it. I think it depends on where you see your work going. What is the vision that you have for the work, and how do you want it to grow? And if an MFA or higher education or the next step is in the cards for you, go for it. People have varying opinions about how that affects the way that you create your work, but I think all learning is learning. You're either going to learn that it wasn't for you, or you're going to learn that it actually made your work better. So if that's something that's in the cards, I'd say go for it. For me, when I sat down to think about what it is that I wanted to accomplish or do, it didn't feel necessary for me to go the MFA route. I felt like I could still accomplish the things that I wanted to do within the confines of like the landscape of the work that I do. And I was able to do that well. But I don't have anything against more, even outside of doing an MFA or going into higher education. This thing I said about like growing your skill and investing in yourself, I've taken workshops online. I find poets that I look up to, who I admire, they're offering something online, I sign up, I pay for that, I take a workshop, or I do find one that's for free. So this idea of always improving upon your skills or building, I think is crucial to getting better at what you do. So none of us are above learning something new. And if that's within a more traditional path, go for it. If you can't even, there are lots of people who can't even afford to do that. There are free resources that you can access online as well. So all learning is good learning. You're either going to come out knowing for sure or deciding you'll never do that again. So go for it.
Okay, our next question is from T Bunme, who asks, when you first left your job and did this full time, understand that things grew, but how long was the uncertain period, and how did you deal with waiting in that period?
Listen, the uncertain period is ongoing always. I think just by nature of the work that we've chosen to do, there you can build a blueprint and an outline, but I always say, like, leave room for the Holy Spirit. So things will happen that weren't in the plan, and sometimes going down that road leads you somewhere beautiful, right? So in being realistic, I would say I left my job in 2013. I moved back to Nigeria. I started acting on Giddy Up, performing at gigs. In fact, I even had gigs where there was like one gig I did where the audience, all the entire audience had their back to me, and I was just sitting there thinking to myself, this is wonderful. You know, or you do gigs where like you don't get paid anything at all, and it just feels like you're just doing this thing. Of course, slowly you're building a name, people are recognizing you, but at the end of the day, it isn't paying you. So you're wondering, when is it going to start to pay? I would say that it took probably 3 or 4 years of consistent doing before I started to feel like there was a tide turning and something was happening that was setting me up for a place in which I could then start to demand higher pay, or then start to say no to certain shows. It take and my 3 or 4 years is somebody else's 10 years, is somebody else's 6 months. It really just depends on the unique circumstances of who you are, where you are, and how your work resonates in that time. Sometimes your work is of the time and suddenly it blows up, and everything is happening for you all at once. And that happens for many people. But I would say for me, I still am grinding, like still am doing the work consistently, but I didn't start to see much of anything until, yeah, 3 4 years in. Then I'm starting to see like there's the wheels are turning and something is happening. And this is not saying that time I didn't earn any money, but it wasn't money I could say, yeah, like I've made it. Even still, I can't say I've made it, but I can say that I've built something that is consistent. So it takes a long time. And this is why people often ask me, should I leave my job? Should I quit my job? Even though that's the path that I chose, I look back on that now and I just wonder, like, wow, like the guts to do that. I always say, do the thing that can work for you while you do the work that you love. So if that means that you still have a part-time something while you're building up this portfolio, while you're creating this work that helps you sustain your bills, your whatever, do that for as long as you need to. And if you decide that this is what you want to do full time, find a point in which it starts to feel like this thing is supporting itself, and then make that leap. There's no award for being a starving artist and blowing up your life only to not have any feet beneath you. So I would say there's no shame in doing other work while you do the work that you love, until you can get it to a point where you're starting to see that something's happening.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Jana Rose. How have you handled people misinterpreting your work or having negative feedback?
Um, I mean, I'm an artist, so I'm sensitive, and it does matter. I won't pretend that it doesn't matter what people think of my work. I just put it out there and it doesn't matter. It matters. Like I want the work to matter to people. I want them to think it's good. Um, but I've also learned over time that you find your tribe. You find the people who care about your work, people who your work means something really deep for them, and you just keep doing the thing that you do in the way that only you can do it. There's these conversations, particularly in the literary world, around what is good or what is bad, or uh, what is worthy of certain platforms. And all of that is probably valid, but always there's an audience for you and your particular brand of what it is that you do. So if you have invested in yourself and continue to grow the work and try to be as good as you possibly can at what you do the way that you do it, then that has to at some point be enough. There was a point in my work where I was doing all of these submissions to places, just submitting because I wanted to be published in certain publications. I wanted to be seen by certain eyes, because for me that was a measure of the work I was doing being valid. And I had to deliver myself from that way of thinking, because still there's an audience that wants the work the way that you do it. And so you do yourself a disservice by sort of continually bashing your head against the wall of an industry or a place that doesn't accept or want the thing that you do. Find your tribe and continue to be the most authentic and honest version of yourself, and of course keep working at it. But like take it on the chin and keep going. It does hurt to be misinterpreted. It does hurt to get negative. Like I see or hear all sorts of things, but ultimately it's like, okay, cool, take the good feedback where it exists and grow. But ultimately not everyone can or will like what you do, and that's okay. You're not for everybody, and that's fine.
That's excellent advice. And it also leads really nicely into our next question, which is from Bridget. Bridget says, I'm writing my debut poetry book, self-publishing. I would appreciate any tips or advice as an aspiring author.
So my first collection was self-published and it's still a collection that I'm really proud of how it did. At the time I published it, got it edited, and and printed it myself because I was working as an engineer then, which is what I say about sometimes when you have another thing, it helps pay for the thing that you love to do, and that's okay. There's no shame in that. And I sold that book hand to hand at performances where I'd perform, people would come up after, where can we see more of your work? I'd be like, here's a book. And that's how I sold the book. But there, of course, better ways to do that now. There are ebooks and things like that, which I wasn't very knowledgeable about at the time. I know that in the publishing industry, self-publishing is seen as not as wholesome or something as the traditional route of publishing through either an indie publisher or a bigger publisher. But I say go for it. You know, the only thing I would advise is, and there might be maybe a grant stream for something like this where you can actually apply to get funding to be mentored by somebody who helps you work through this book writing process, or get a really, really good and rigorous editor that isn't your friend or family or someone who loves you, and do the work of taking that feedback and really, really polishing this book that you have until it is in a place where you feel that it is good. And print publishing isn't the only way anymore. There are ebook versions that are much cheaper to make happen and move much faster. And so I would say don't be pigeonholed into the traditional ways that things are done. Do the work to make sure that the content is good, and then think about creative ways. There are all kinds of things that are happening in publishing right now where you can share your work quickly and efficiently without having to feel like you need the backing of a giant publisher. So I'd say just find a mentor or somebody you can work with, and a very, very, very good editor, and don't be afraid to do the work.
Okay, our next question is from Kay, who asks, do you have written contracts for everything you agree to, or do you trust them to uphold the monetary amount or value agreed to, say over email?
Even an email stands up, you know, if that's all you have. Like, get it in writing is what I would say at a minimum. And this is something I will say, there are a lot of organizations that invite you to do things that insist on speaking over the phone, and that's fine. It's a first place to kind of explain what they're trying to get you to do, how much they have, etc. But I always insist, could you put this in an email? Could you formalize this in an email that I will respond to? What that does in the absence of an agreement, which I wouldn't advise, but in the absence of an agreement, it creates a paper trail in which they said, this is what we want you to do. This is how much we're going to pay you. Yes, I agree. This is the date. This is the time. And all of it is there, such that if you ever get into a situation where you have to prove that this happened, you don't just have a phone call that happened at 6 p.m. on a Friday. So get it in an email, but even better than an email is a one-pager. So in situations where they don't have an agreement, maybe they're just a small organization that isn't used to that, I will offer a template of something that says, this, just simply, this is what we've agreed to, this is how much I'm going to be paid, and this is when it's going to happen for a finite period of time. We sign here and it's done. But yes, I always get it in writing, because things happen. People forget. Even let's not even just assume that they're being sinister. People forget and decide that it was something else that was said. Get it all in an email, even just for you to have a place where you know date, time, and expectations. And sometimes a phone call isn't as clear. They can write down what exactly they're looking for you to do, especially in commissions and things like that. Getting it in writing gives you a place to reference back, but ultimately it protects you. And if they don't have an agreement, get one done up and have somebody who knows what they're doing look over both their agreement or yours so that you are protected.
Okay, we have two questions from Chuck.
Okay.
First one is, if you are in a remote place where the poetry community isn't so strong, how do you build it?
Okay. I mean, I'm not in a remote place, but I will say that when I started the Breath in Poetry Collective here in Edmonton, there wasn't, and in that first year, we went to a national poetry slam across the country. There was no slam poetry happening. So it just simply didn't exist. The way to build it, or the way that I built it, was to decide this is what I want to do. And I started simply, and simple and elegant is also okay. You know, my only idea at the time was I want to do a weekly open mic. So the first thing I needed was a place to do that weekly open mic. And the next thing I needed was people that will come. And the way that I advertised it at the time, email to like the few people that I knew, or Facebook, and now you have Instagram or Twitter. It's about saying, I'm creating a thing. What I did at the time was I found a local business, a restaurant here in Edmonton to collaborate with, and they said they had an open night, a Tuesday. I wanted a Friday because Friday feels like a more happening evening, but they said they had a Tuesday, and I said, okay, I'll take a Tuesday. And it was free for us to use the space. They sold pizza. We could come in. They had a microphone and a makeshift stage. I said, that's all I need. And then I just started asking people, Facebook, tell friends to tell friends to tell friends, and found maybe 2 or 3 people that were willing to read their poems. Of course, I had to read so many poems because the list was 3 people long. And then we just showed up on that night and started sharing our work. And the partner that I collaborated with to do that work, I mean, there are a bunch of people, but the most consistent who stayed with me a while was Ahmed Ali. And sometimes Ahmed was a poet as well. Sometimes we would just be reading our poems to each other across the table because nobody came. And so it was just like the slow, deliberate work of keeping the night going. People know that you're there every week, and continuing to advertise it. And maybe next week 5 people come, maybe the week after that 10 people come. And the Breath and Poetry Collective and the Poetry Night existed for a decade, where some nights we had people, you know, outside the door who couldn't get in. People were sitting on the floors. But that happened with consistent weekly, in the middle of winter in Edmonton, driving downtown to host this night. And sometimes you would show up and only one person showed up, but that one person expected that you were going to be there. So you show up and you show up consistently and you keep going, and you have to offer yourself as tributes and just share your work until you find, and people, it doesn't matter how remote it is, there's a tribe, they will find you and they will come, and you just give them something that's consistent and keep going.
Okay, the second question is, how do you approach big names in the industry for mentorship, partnership, and collaboration?
Okay, so I'll talk about mentorship first, because I have a thought about how mentorships work. So I don't believe that mentorships are a thing in which this big name person downloads all of their knowledge and know-how to you, this little name person who absorbs it and then does something with it. I feel like a mentorship is a relationship and an exchange, and one that oftentimes happens quite organically. So it is unfair to approach a mentor and say, I want to know all the things, tell me all the things, because the mentor is also in the business of living their own lives. But it helps when, if you approach a mentor, you know, these are sort of the goals that I have, these are the questions that I have, and I'm hoping that this person will be able to answer those questions for me. The first place to go for them to answer those questions is if that person is doing something, show up, like be in the orbit. So my mentor is performing at an event, I show up. And I'll give a lived example. Debbie Young is a poet who I deeply admire. She's based out of Toronto. And at the time, I was just a baby poet, just starting this thing. And I heard that Debbie was doing a performance here in Edmonton. I bought a ticket and sat in the audience and just listened. And some of that, like, a person can mentor you without necessarily sitting on the phone with you for hours at a time, but it's just by taking in what they do, how they do it. And I just kept paying attention. Where's Debbie going to be next? Like a little stalker. You know, Debbie was teaching a workshop. I show up. Debbie's doing a workshop in Cape Town, South Africa. I sign up. I save up the money. I go. It was about, this person is offering something of value, and I can come into that exchange and gain something from it, versus something that feels sort of more like you're trying to leech something from the other person. People have books, they do all the time. There are ways in which people are giving themselves to you. Receive them in that way. And sometimes it's about putting your money where your mouth is. Rachel McKibbins is another mentor of mine who was hosting a workshop online. I signed up, I paid I saved up and I paid for it, and took an online workshop with somebody I hope to be a mentor one day, such that when I was writing my poetry collection, I had established this relationship, and I could then say, hello, Rachel, I'm writing this book. Do you remember me from your workshop? Would you mind reading it, giving me your thoughts, and potentially providing a blurb? And she said yes. Sometimes people say no, and that's okay, because people are in the business of living their own lives. So I would say first, be in the orbit. Where are they showcasing their work? Show up, support them in the way that you expect to be supported as well. For partnerships and collaborations, I think when you say big names, I'm assuming you mean people who are well established and on their way in their career. I mean, I think it's a lot to ask for partnerships and collaborations at that stage. You could shoot your shot, but like I said, like you could get a no. Partnerships and collaborations are easier accessible with people who are growing with you, but ask the question, and if there's a no, then take it on the chin and accept the no. But I think an entry point to even a partnership or collaboration is through that semi-mentorship relationship in which you are in this person's orbit, you show up and support the work that they do, you learn from them, and you build organic relationships that lead to collaborations. It can't be this thing where the end goal is only to gain for yourself. There has to be something in this relationship that you can offer as well. There has to be an organic coming together that even when you say, I want to collaborate in this way, it's an obvious thing. Yes, of course, like you're somebody that I know.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Tolu. Do you suggest a new poet go the traditional publishing or the self-publishing route?
Honestly, I don't know either way. I think that the world is so dynamic and so big and beautiful that traditional publishing or self-publishing can do the thing that you want it to do. There are poets who started off on Instagram who self-published their books and sold, millions of copies. There are poets who are in the traditional route who are still, scraping for, I don't know, the 10% or the royalties that they get back from this massive publisher that they're published under. For me, it's about responding to the times and not necessarily believing that one is greater than the other. I've self-published, I've published with an indie publisher, I've published with an unknown publisher. My intent was, where can I get my work treated with respect? And how can that work reach the people that I care about? I think it is very old-fashioned to imagine that traditional publishing does some special thing that self-publishing cannot. Perhaps you have a bigger engine behind you, but you also have less of the returns from the work that you've put in the world. So there's always like there's giving and taking on either end. So I would say move in the direction that feels most organic, and there's no shame in either of those options. Do the thing that feels most organic for the work that you create, and go where you are loved and respected.
Okay, and we have one more question from Tulu, actually. How do you come up with themes for your work in periods where you don't feel particularly inspired?
So one of the things I had to learn when I started doing this full time was that I couldn't wait to be inspired. Otherwise, I was going to starve. So I had to create. I had to be consistent about just showing up in front of the laptop, in front of the piece of paper, and writing as much nonsense as was possible until I arrived at something that was adjacent to not nonsense. I had to create a practice, even though it wasn't easy or isn't easy. It's about just consistently saying, this is what I want to do. I'm going to show up for myself. And eventually, I think Maya Angelou has this quote about just showing up and eventually the muse will appear. And it's the same, it's just like you show up, you put something on the page. Today, it's not good. Tomorrow, it's average. The day after, it's yucky again. You keep trying, but also leave room for rest. One of the things I've realized over this pandemic year was that a very big part of my writing process happens up here first. It happens in the living. And so not being able to go outside really, really was a particularly painful experience for me, because I realized that the writing actually is a very small part of the work that I do in my own way. It might be different for you. I needed to be outside. I needed to be in the world, just like quietly ingesting things and living things so that I could write things. So if it's not coming, you also don't have to force a thing. a lot of the work that we create is lived work. So go and do something unrelated. You know, I bought a guitar in this pandemic year and started learning how to play guitar again. I had a guitar when I was 15 years old that I just rarely played. But again, just plucking away at something. Pick up a paintbrush, try another medium that has nothing to do with the work that you do. Listen to music. So ingesting other art forms or trying your hand at something you've never done before. I feel like something about that triggers the brain and then might just bring something up, one line that you can just latch onto, and then the work appears. So a mixture of showing up for yourself consistently and also just giving yourself room to breathe and grow and live, and then coming back to it again.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to drop down a couple questions in the chat just because
Okay.
Titilope has already addressed a few of them. But you have an interesting question from Ayomide. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. What are the new radical places or forms you see poetry existing in now and in the future?
The poets are taking over. Poets are everywhere, in my opinion. I think it's an exciting time to be a poet, and I think it's an exciting time to do poetry in the way that you do poetry. You know, we used to imagine that poetry existed on the page or, you know, only, and it was the poems that you heard in the classroom and the teacher was teaching it to you. But now poets are self-publishing, they're releasing ebooks, they're releasing albums and short films. There are poets who have films on Netflix now, and 1 hour specials on Amazon Prime. There's even something I've heard about, like a sort of like a blockchain version of book releases. That's kind of like how crypto works, but it's books. I think we are in a really exciting time with the way that the world is moving, and I feel like poets can be in the mix. And the beauty of the work that we do is that I feel like it has legs. I feel like it is dynamic, and I always say I want to go where the magic is. So I honestly don't know that there's a limit to where a poet can exist in the world right now. Like I sit and listen to a Beyonce album, and it's a poet who's written that from like start to to finish, from Lemonade to Black is King. Those are poets. And so even in trying to build out a career for myself, part of what I'm doing is listening for, like, I'm watching a movie or I'm listening to a song, I'm thinking about where's the poetry in that and where can I plug myself into it? Where can I create within that, like within those boundaries? So yeah, I think the world is moving and poets are moving with it, but everywhere, I guess, is the short answer to that question. Poets are everywhere.
That's such a beautiful answer. Thank you. Ruth says, first off, thank you for sharing your experiences and your art. Is there any skill set or operating principle that you carry with you into your life as a poet performer from having worked as a civil engineer?
Yes. For a long time, I didn't know what they had to do with each other. I thought that engineering and poetry were very separate things and I didn't know how to bring them together. But I will say that being an engineer and having like a design sensibility, or having a love of symmetry and clarity, has made it such that that is reflected in the kind of poetry that I write. I don't believe that poetry has to be overly complicated to be good. I actually think that simplicity and elegance are very difficult to pull off. And so in my work, in my writing, I'm trying to create work that feels symmetrical. I'm trying to create work that feels elegant and beautiful to look at, to hear, to feel. And I'm editing ruthlessly to get to that point. And so I think a lot of that, like, sort of discipline and clean lines comes from my work as an engineer. The idea that, like, something equals another thing. A thing has to come full circle. It has to sort of have a form and a shape, I think, comes from that work, and just comes from diligently showing up and trying to polish the thing consistently. And just, if you think about like math equations and solving a problem, it's iterative at times, and it's just slowly plugging away at the thing until like the answer appears. I treat my approach to writing in a similar way. It's just like showing up for a poem again and again and again until you're like, oh, maybe after editing a poem for a week or two, I come away with 2 lines. I'm like, okay, let's start again and iterate that process again and again until it feels like it's there. I think that is definitely a civil engineering brain working there.
I'm glad someone asked that question because I was curious about that too. So thank you for that answer. We have a question from Elizabeth. What would you say is the biggest difference between poetry and spoken word?
I mean, spoken word is poetry. I think it's just an umbrella and different forms underneath that umbrella. I don't think that they are separate things. A variation of this question is like page versus the stage. For me, my work begins on the page anyway before I say it out loud. And so for me, they're fruits of the same tree. The only difference, I guess, is that one is spoken and perhaps the other one isn't, but this doesn't say page, it just says poetry. So I don't like, I mean, there are all kinds of ways that poets express themselves, and spoken word is just poetry to me that is spoken.
Okay, our next question is from Tracy. Tracy asks, within the traditional publishing industry, how strong or not is the poetry market at present? Are there specific trends in that market?
You'd have to ask a publisher, I think. But I will say, in my experience, it has paid for my poetry to exist in many different mediums. People read books, people buy books, and I find even in a live performance, people want something they can take with them. And sometimes that's a book, sometimes that's an album or something else, but they want something they can hold and take home. That still is something that people place value on. But I can't say that in my experience that books flying off the shelves is the way in which I've been able to sustain my career. And I think there's this myth that once you get published, something magical happens and you start just rolling in dollars. And that hasn't been my experience. And I don't think it's been the experience of many people that I know. It's oftentimes a slow trickle unless, you are a writer that exists in a completely different realm, or something viral or magical happens for you, which we can't all count on. But just because that is true doesn't mean that books don't have value. They absolutely do. For me, what I've had to learn is that that has to exist alongside other things that I do to sustain my career. I wouldn't rely on a book, words in a page alone to sustain my life.
Okay, just as a little check-in, we have two questions left in the chat. Are you okay to answer two more energy-wise? Yeah. Okay, excellent.
Good.
So we have a question from Jaden. Oh, we just got a third one. We're okay with the third if you're good.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, question from Jaden. I recently began to write content for marketing. I'm worried that my business voice could dilute my poetic voice. I'm worried when I talk too much about scales that I might lose authenticity with my tribe. Content writing pays some bills, but I'm not earning from poetry yet, so it's kind of a battle. Any advice? Do I live by the word in one direction so I don't dilute my message?
I think you contain multitudes. Like, you can do anything that you want to do. And so I say this to say that I write a lot of work for brands that aren't necessarily my core poetry audience, but I've learned to separate those things in my mind, right? So I've learned to be able to approach this with a business mind. So I enter a meeting with a brand that says, I want to create this marketing campaign. This is what we're looking for. I'm able to take that in an email or whatever, and the list of things that they want to see or feel, and then bring in my own poetic sensibilities to that, but also keeping in mind that these people, they're looking for a specific product, and this isn't the place for me to bring in something obscure or difficult to understand, because that's not that market. I don't think that one dilutes the other. Both of those things can exist. I know which audience is for what thing, and you're constantly kind of holding all the balls in the air at the same time, and that's okay. I think as long as you are continuing to feed the heart, which is one of the things I spoke about, you're continuing to feed your why, you read your books, you listen to your music, you live your life, that poetic voice exists regardless. But it is also okay to lend that poetic sensibility to work that isn't traditional poetry, but will pay the bills. And to me, there's no shame in that. There's nothing at all wrong with being able to do all the things.
Okay, our next question is from Iyanu. There's a beautiful rhythm in the way you deliver your poetry. How are you able to achieve this? Are there any techniques or practices that help you write with rhythm?
Um, I think like honing your poetic voice happens slowly and over time. And sometimes it's even first by like influence poets that you love, you listen to, and then suddenly you find yourself kind of starting to sound a bit like them, and then you edit away again and just try to find where's your sweet spot. I say just as musicians or singers have like a perfect pitch, poets too have a pitch that they're reaching towards in the work that they create. And so it's iterative. You just keep trying. For me, when I write, I listen to a lot of music. Either music with active lyrics or music that is just like purely instrumental. And when I'm practicing, when I'm writing and editing a poem, I'm also practicing it out loud. So I edit on the page for like clarity and elegance and simplicity. That's what I'm working toward. But as I'm doing that, I'm also saying it out loud. I'm doing like a performance edit. And then there's another edit that happens in live performance as well, where I'm sort of like doing the poem and I'm feeling out the room and I'm seeing what's happening. When I go away from that performance, I'm like, okay, this is what happened. And I adjust a little bit more because there's an immediate call and response that happens in live performance that I love, which is why it will always have my heart, because you know, based on your pace, the way you're saying a thing, where you're pausing, where you're speeding up, you can kind of see, it's like a live edit. You can see what's happening in the room, and that helps you sort of polish over time. So it's iterative. Listen to things that you love and find out what it is that you're loving there and try to apply that to your work. And then just keep trying until you find a place that feels like an old shoe that you put on and you're like, okay, I'm in it, like this is where I'm at. But practice, just like any instrument, the voice or your speaking voice is an instrument that you tune over time.
I love that image of an old shoe, just sliding into it perfectly. Our next question is from Ketty. Ketty says, thank you for being so generous with your experience. This is priceless. How do you balance the need for personal reflective time and the many demands and interactions that come with marketing your work?
That's a real question. And I won't lie to you, it can feel exhausting at times. I took the entire 2020 off social media. I just logged off December 2019 and I didn't come back till January 1st, 2021. And then a pandemic happened, which I didn't know was going to happen when I logged off, but I was grateful to be fully rooted in the real world. It's a balance, right? So you make time within the time that you have to share yourself, like to share your light with the world. But I will never advise you to do that at the expense of your peace of mind. I also believe that there's like a lot of material coming at us day to day. We are hyper connected and hyper aware of what other people are doing all the time, which isn't necessarily healthy. You start to compare yourself and it's like, am I doing enough? Do people know enough? Am I like this? It's a ruthless cycle. So what I would say is find a balance that works for you and just do that balance consistently. So if your balance is I'm posting something once a week, do your once a week and let that be okay. And in that once a week, go for broke, like do all the things that you need to do and then rest. There is no, you don't have to be there all the time to trust that your work will matter. When I took the year off, I was fearful that I would come back and people would forget or not care. And that's not what happened. But I took a year and I rested and I lived my life. I had my babies. And now I can return into the space and continue to share my work, but not feel as though the work is feel as though I'm being worked by the work, So find a balance that works for you and just stick to it and ramp it up when you can and take it down when you can't. And that has to be okay. And also you can automate things. You don't always have to be online. You can actually automate things to post when you're not there, or you can sponsor a post and let it do like a 2 or 3 week run and you can log off in that time. Or you can hire somebody if you're balling.
Those are all excellent suggestions. Thank you. Just keeping an eye on the clock. I think we have time just to get through the questions that are left in the chat. So we'll just work through these if you're okay for a couple more.
Sure.
Did you always know how, oh, sorry, this is from Gethy. Did you always know how to present spoken word, or is it something you learned on the job? How did you master this art?
Mm. This is coming from someone who cannot do any. Oh, okay. I didn't always know anything. I just listened to work that inspired me, and I thought, oh, maybe I can try this. And I just tried. Like, I tried in my open mic that I create. This is the thing about creating community, right? So one of the things about creating community, what it does for you is gives you a place to shamelessly shame yourself. It gives you a place to go and just try things and be embarrassed or not embarrassed. Like, have a crew of people who will give you feedback gently, and that within that space. And one of the things I go back to often is, I think in the day and age that we're in, people are afraid to do work in the dark. That is the most beautiful place to be, where nobody knows anything about anything that you're doing and you're just quietly plugging away. And in that dark period, when you're just with your reading group or you're sharing work with them, you're trying out new things, you're editing on the go, you're doing first drafts to sixth draft with a crew of people. That is actually where the work happens, such that when you become sort of forward facing and people see you've already, there's a system that is working there in which you're not afraid to go away for some time and just practice. Like, just like people who play piano or any other instrument, like they're practicing the same line, the same riff over and over and over and over again until they can do it without even thinking about it. That's the place you want to be with spoken word as well. Sometimes I'm performing a poem on stage, and I've done it so many times that I've actually, like, the poem, my mouth is moving of its own accord, and I'm sort of like able to be in the flow of that poem without just thinking the words, because the words have become a part of, like, they are like in my muscle and bone now, because I've said this poem so many times that I can actually enjoy the performance because I'm just like, I'm in it. So do it a million times in your car, in the shower, on the toilet, wherever you are. Just keep, practicing.
Okay, our next question is from Ruth. Is there any aspect of community or performance you have experienced in Nigeria that may inform or open out in your work in Edmonton as Poet Laureate?
Yeah, like, Nigeria is where I learned how to hustle. That's where I learned that there was room and the sky was big and there were so many different things I could do beyond writing poems for a page, beyond showing up at a microphone and then going home. Because the arts community is so vibrant and rich and beautiful and spunky and smart, I had to sort of learn, like, people are trying things. This was the first time I thought, okay, let's do a stage production and have a band. Let's do poetry and let's just try things. There's a spirit, there's a hustle, there's ingenuity that's happening that I've learned from that experience that I hope to bring into this role. And it's part of why, like, doing workshops like this matter to me. It's saying to poets who are in the community that there's work, and there's work in so many different ways that it can be done beyond the traditional. I'm hoping that what will inform my role is this idea that poetry is expansive and there's so many different ways you can plug storytelling into. I mean, I'll call it storytelling as a whole thing. So go for it. Like, there's no canon that I am sort of bowed to. There's no table of judges that I'm thinking about when I'm creating my work. I'm just creating, I'm going where the magic goes, and whoever loves the work will find the work. And I want people to feel that sense of freedom and not the fear around, like, the industry, as it were.
Amazing. Okay, our next question is from Wisdom, who asks, is it okay to pitch your poems directly to already established poets in order to get your work out there faster?
Could you say that to me again?
Yeah, of course. Is it okay to pitch your poems directly to already established poets in order to get your
Right.
work out there faster?
I'm not sure what that means. I'm thinking maybe it means that the established poets will share the work, because I'm not sure what that pitch would look like to an already established poet. Um, I will say that this is something that happens to me often. I will get messages. I've had people send me their entire manuscripts just in an email. Don't do that. Don't do that. I think this is your precious, precious work. Don't just send it to anybody, even if they're an established poet that you care about, that you love. I don't think that's the way to do it. And you also have to be clear about why you're doing that. Are you looking for an editor? Because there are people who edit poetry for a living that you can pay to edit your work. Are you looking for feedback? Maybe you sign up for a workshop and get feedback on individual poems. But I think we have to be really careful about the role that we think that established poets, quote unquote, play in pushing or moving our work further. So an established poet posts your poem on their page or whatever it is, like, I'm not sure. What does that actually do? And how does that actually add value for you? Always in seeking out where to grow, even if that person is somebody that you admire, they may not add value for you. And so approach people in a way that feeds back your ideals, in a way that feeds back your goals and aspirations for yourself, in a way that adds value for you, and in a way that you can also add value back. So I wouldn't say pitch your poems to an already established poet. I'm not sure what the question means specifically, but outside of like real specific clean lines around what it is you're trying to accomplish, don't just send your poems to anybody, no matter who they are, established or not.
Okay, we have one last question. It has some beautiful compliments in it first for you, so I'll read them out first. Lovett says, if this isn't a blessing that I'm watching you talk in real time, there's something about the way you write and perform that always makes me feel like you've experienced every poem firsthand. I understand that as artists, we try to be very empathetic, but the way you deliver most poems seems to go deeper than empathy. Often, at least to me and some of my friends, your poems come off like you have a firsthand experience of the stories in this poem. How do you achieve this hyper empathy?
I think it was DeB who once told me that when you're creating art, you have to implicate yourself first. And it took me a while to really understand what that meant. For me, now it means that no matter what it is that I'm writing about, I always try to find a through line back to me, back to something that is true for me, back to something that is lived for me, back to something I can touch and feel. Otherwise, I'm just performing a poem for the sake of performing a poem. And I'm talking about even in commissioned work, even for brand work, there's always like, how do I connect this to something that is meaningful to me? And that is something that I established in my why. So that heart work that I was talking about is that, like, what is your why? What do you care about? So that when you're writing work, no matter the medium or place, if it is connected to something that you've lived, inevitably it comes out in the way that you write the work and in the way that you perform or share the work, as it were. It is important for me for my work to feel true, to be true. And so I try not to just write anything. That also means saying no sometimes to work that I feel like doesn't resonate with me or won't resonate with the people who have entrusted me to like listen to me when I speak. So I guess what I'm saying is I try to find a line back to myself, and I want to touch and feel the thing and for it to be real inside my body. One of the gifts of performance for me is that it allows me to go beyond the technical side of like creating and crafting a poem on the page. When you put that poem in your body, by that I mean you memorize it, you know the words, you know the lines, and you've said it over and over and over again. It becomes a part of you in a way that you can't separate from, so that when it is time to share that work, it's in your blood now. And it's in your blood, both in the words that you're saying, but also because it like you've relived it every time you have rehearsed it and said it and said it and said it, such that when you're sharing with an audience, you're inside of this poem fully. For me, a poem feels more real, more true when I've spent more time working on it, when it's not a first or a second draft. Like I've really, really been rigorous in the creation and in the knowing of that poem. It feels true. And I will say thank you for the absolute compliment that you just paid. It means the world to me that is the way that my work is received, because it's something that like I hold at the center. It matters the most to me that the work is true.
Okay, well, perfect timing. That brings us right to 7:30. I know I speak for all of us when I say thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and all of your advice with such kindness and such grace tonight. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else learned a lot as well. Can we just take a second and do a round of applause for Titilope, either out loud or with the little Zoom function? There's a little tiny applause symbol down at the very bottom. If we were in person, there'd be wonderful roaring applause. So we'll just imagine it for this time. But thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. And like I mentioned before, David will be sending out a feedback survey. Any responses that you have are much appreciated. It helps with future programming. So thank you so much again for being here. And thank you so much to Titilope for all of your thoughts this evening. I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to say just before we wrap up, but you've already shared so much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful for your audience. I hope this was helpful. I know that it's a little scattered, but I hope that it was helpful in some way. I think a lot of you know where to find me. So if you have any more questions, feel free to send them. And as I have time, I will respond. But just that, like, I know that this work is cloudy and hard to see through sometimes, and it feels like it's not going to click. Just keep going. Just keep going. Consistently, little drops of water, like consistency over time is actually what builds the career. There isn't some magical thing that's going to happen. You just have to be in the grind of doing it, And so I hope to see you all out there in the world, and I'm sending you all good vibes for all the dreams that you have. Good luck.
And there are some wonderful compliments in the chat. So I will save the chat and I will send it directly to Titilope afterwards so she can see all of your lovely comments.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight.